we present Beowulf, an original adaptation, written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 15. The Goblet. The gold glittered. This seems like an obvious thing to say. Gold is supposed to glitter. But this gold seemed to glitter all the more because Carl hadn't expected to see it here. And he certainly hadn't expected to see so much of it. He had simply been looking for somewhere to hide after a small misunderstanding had put him on the wrong side of his lord's ill temper. Hole up for a day or two, wait till it all blows over, and then stroll back into town. That had been his plan. But seeing all that glittering gold piled high, Carl thought it was safe to say that his plan would most certainly change. He had not known the cave was here. To his certain knowledge, no one knew the cave was here. He'd lived in the area his whole life, and not once had anyone mentioned caves in this location. It was a small place. Caves would have been big news. In truth, he had stumbled into the place quite by accident. He had been running at a full sprint and had just heard the sound that no runner wishes to hear. Hounds. Coursing hounds, if he was any guess, swift and sure-footed. As he had glanced behind him to see if they were yet visible, his foot had come down on what seemed like solid earth until, with a stomach-churning lurch, the ground beneath him gave way and he was falling down, down, down into the dark. He must have hit his head because the next thing he remembered was waking up. At first he had thought the blow to his skull had addled his vision because his eyes seemed to dance with sparkling, glittering flecks of light. He had shaken himself all over, but the light still shimmered, and as he looked around further he had noticed that these flecks of light didn't stop with him, but they sprayed across the walls and floor and cave roof above him. Perhaps his brain had been addled by the blow, because it had taken him a very long time to realize that if light was sparkling all round this cave, that must be because it was first hitting something shiny, or, as it would appear, lots of shiny somethings, more shiny somethings than Carl had ever dared to dream of. He did not know what to do with himself. He did not know what to look at first. He wished he had more eyes to look at it all. He wished he had more hands to grab hold of it all. He picked up a great golden plate and inspected it. No, that wasn't quite special enough. He picked up a heavy chain with gold and silver links cunningly forged together. No, still not quite right. He rifled through coins and nuggets and ingots, filling his bag, belt pouch and boots with treasure and wealth. He even stuffed some down his shirt to try and hold more.
"There's enough here for a man to live well for 1,000 years!"
he yelled out, the excitement welling up inside him until it overflowed.
"I shall never have to steal again!"
Stealing. Yes, that brought him back to his senses with a thud. That was what had set him on the run in the first place. Better deal with that first. Better to go and make amends with his lord, and then come back to this treasure trove and live like a lord himself. His eyes scanned the shining mound greedily, searching for the perfect item to present to his lord to smooth things over. And then he saw it. A flawless golden goblet, gem-encrusted, finely worked and etched with perfect patterns. Yes, this was the ideal item. Clutching hold of it tightly, Carl scrambled his way out of the cave, took a good look around to make sure he could find it again in a hurry, and set off running to his lord's hall as fast as his legs would carry him. But it was safe to say that Carl's plans were about to change again. For Carl had not been alone in that deep, dark cavern, far from it. He did not know it, but the cave had another occupant, one who had slumbered there for 300 years amidst its hoard of treasure. And now Carl had blundered in and taken some of that treasure for himself, and its owner wanted it back. Stretching its long, scaled spine, the great dragon uncoiled its mighty length and reached forth a taloned claw. For centuries it had slumbered here among its hoard, and for centuries before it had dwelled among it, rejoicing in its size and variety and brilliance and perfection. It knew each and every piece in that trove, the shape of it, the smell of it, the taste of it. It knew the cup that had been taken, a noble relic of a land now long since past. The serpent had claimed that cup after sacking a towering city and razing it to the ground. This goblet was the last remnant of that place, the last testament to its prowess and victory in destroying that place, and now it had been taken? This would not stand. Reaching out, the dragon began to haul itself forth from the cavern where it had lain for so long that men had forgotten it, though they would certainly remember it hereafter. No new dragon this, it was one of the old ones. Already old when the earth was young, it had lived 1,000,000 lifetimes, and recalled the world long before the menfolk had walked its surface. Unfurling its wings, the ancient worm beat them back and forth to feel the wind beneath them gust. Finally satisfied, it let loose a crackling cry and soared high up into the sky in search of the treasure that was stolen from it. What followed would live in the memories of men for 1,000 years. Roaming far and wide, the great serpent laid waste to every home, settlement, and hall that it could find, belching forth great gouts of flame. Where menfolk ran, it chased them, first for the food, then for the sheer sport. Where menfolk stood to face it down, the dragon destroyed them, with fire and claw and poisoned fangs. Wherever it roamed, death came with it in the shadow of its wings. But there was one man in that realm who was quite used to facing death. One who had looked it in the eye so many times that its gaze no longer held any fear. Beowulf, the king of the Geats. Yes, he was no stranger to facing death. And as the great dragon flew over his hall, spewing fire to the left and to the right, he knew it was his fate to face it once again. For 50 years Beowulf had ruled over the Geats as their king and their protector. For 50 years he had stood as their shield. Where other kings grew old and frail and turned to younger men to fight their battles for them, Beowulf still stood strong. He remembered well the kings lost in service of Geatland, kings he should have been able to protect, and he would not allow himself to grow weak, and he would ask no man to fight in his place. Hearing the cries and shouts of the frightened people as the dragon flew by, he remembered his younger days where he had faced the monster Grendel. There he had fought with his bare hands to spare the Danes a dark fate, hands that still remembered the strength of their youth. He remembered too the battle with Grendel's mother, where he had sought out great danger in the dark to spare Hrothgar's folk from further bloodshed. There he had needed the right weapon for the right time, and that was a lesson he had learned well. Entering the blacksmith's forge, he commissioned a great iron shield to be made with a handle wrapped in leather. That, he hoped, would hold off the dragon's flame for long enough for him to make an end of the beast. For 50 years he had defended his people, not trusting the task to others, placing himself between the Geats and all those who meant them harm. Now, though, for the first time he began to fear that he had fought too many battles alone. He had stood against all the enemies of Geatland, and though other men had stood by his side, he knew that without him they would not have been there at all. His mind leapt back to his mother's wisdom all those years before, when he had asked after the fate of warrior kings who could not grow old gracefully. "They die," she had told him, "usually on the point of a spear. Recognizing you are old and that the time of the young has come is one of the great trials that faces anyone, Beowulf." Had he failed so spectacularly in facing that trial? As he walked back from the smithy and saw the frightened faces around him, He wondered whether he should have done more to raise up new warriors among his people, ones who could replace him when he was gone. He thought of the work his father had done in building the sea wardens in the Danelands, a practice still used today. A knot of worry built within him as the realization gnawed at him that he should have taken the same example. He too should have created an order of warriors to make the Geats great and strong for generations to come. But it was too late for that now, and he would have to stand as their shield once more. Entering his chambers, he began pulling on the fine mail armour that was Wayland's work. He put on the great boar-crested helm King Hrothgar had given him. He pulled on war gloves and boots with strips of steel running through them for protection. He wrapped his belt around him where his sword and dagger hung, sheathed and ready, and at last stood complete. The armour may not have hugged him so tight as it had in his youth, but it was sleek and strong and felt like a second skin. The war helm may have weighed heavier than it had done in his younger days, but it fitted him far better than the crown ever had. Drawing his sword, Naegling, his hand clasped the hilt as close as a lover. Finally he took up the fresh-forged iron shield, and at last he was ready. Ready to meet the dragon, ready to meet death itself, to stare it in the eye, and find out which one of them would blink.
Thanks for listening. Beowulf was a Settle Stories commission written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story editor was Miriam Sarin. Intro music was Warrior by Hartzman. Outro music was Travel in the Ocean by Monument Music. It was a Parable Arts production.